Senator, we're not even a month into the Trump term. Tomorrow marks 1 month. You and I are taping on a Wednesday. Already, it sounds like you're digging your heels in for a fight for the rest of the 3 years and 11 months to go. Is this the way to go, Senator?
Well, a lot depends on the direction that the president goes. But when he decides that the separation of powers that has held this country together since its inception no longer applies to him, when he decides that court orders don't need to be followed any longer, and when he lies and throws key allies like Ukraine under the bus, he makes it very hard to find ways to agree with him. I think we'll probably for sure agree on getting rid of fallback and adjusting that. Mm-hmm. And there are other things that I've done where I've been the lead Democrat on stuff that Trump has liked, like judicial reform, some of the ocean cleanup stuff. So I keep looking for opportunities, but he sure isn't being very helpful about providing opportunities.
Well, he says he's doing the right thing with DOGE, that he's going into agencies. He's deputized Elon Musk and his team to go look for waste, fraud, and abuse, and he's finding it. Now, you've heard this litany.
Whoa. What makes you think he's finding it? He takes like everybody who got hired after a certain date and fires all of them, no matter whether they're performing well or not. Right. That's not waste, fraud, and abuse. That's just hatchet work.
Well, would you like the list? We spent money on a transgender program in Colombia. We spent money on similar entertainment in Iran. You heard the list.
I've been through that list, and so has the press.
Right.
And it's been widely debunked.
Not all of it, Senator. No, not all of it. No, not all of it has. The condoms for Gaza actually went to Mozambique. But apart from that, the other stuff, Sesame Street in Iraq, the entertainment, the coloring books, that hasn't been debunked, nor has the $70 billion in wasteful Social Security spending.
Most of it has been debunked. And what remains is such a tiny portion of the USAID budget that it really is not a legitimate excuse to destroy the entire agency. There's a question in warfare of proportionality. Just because somebody takes a pot shot at you from a window, you don't destroy the city. This is destroying the city because there's a pot shot or two that you don't like. I'm not going to defend everything that USAID has done, but I do think it's wrong to destroy an entire agency over objections you have to less than 0.1% of its budget.
Yeah, point well taken, Senator. But here's a bit of the list: $1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia, $70,000 for the production of DEI musical in Ireland, $47,000 for the trans opera in Colombia, $32,000 for the trans comic book in Peru, and we just heard today $70 billion $70 billion misspent in Social Security in 8 years. Go ahead, Senator. Isn't he just trying to weed it out and then resume the stuff that's right?
No. Not when you're destroying an entire agency, not when you're messing around with Social Security, not when you've got Elon Musk's little Musk-Rats running actually into the data, which may be the most valuable thing in all of this, particularly for the tech bros who lined up for the Trump inauguration. These are people who want to get their hands on that data. It is immensely valuable to them to have that data. We have protected that data. IRS data, Social Security data, healthcare data for generations, since always. And now they're running in, looting through the data systems without accountability. It's hard to say that that is seriously trying to root out waste, fraud, or abuse.
Wouldn't anybody that the president deputizes to go look for waste, fraud, and abuse have access to the same thing? And is it just because it's Elon Musk that has you and the Democrats worked up? By the way, I have the list of names you've been calling him on.
We're actually super restricted about who's allowed to get particularly taxpayer data. Right. That's one thing that has always been very closely held. Social Security data, who's being paid what. You don't need most of that data to find where waste and abuse is. They're looking way beyond any legitimate scope of looking for actual waste, fraud, and abuse. Rhode Island company, Adhesia, it makes a special food product just for a very narrow population. Little children, infants and toddlers, who are so far into starvation that they can't digest food any longer. It's a really narrow group of people. They got cut. They weren't, and they know it's out there. They just don't bother. They want to destroy the agency even in those areas where it's doing immense good and it's making a Rhode Island product that helps keep little tiny children alive in places where they would otherwise starve to death.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Adesia. I know the good work they do, but I suppose Trump would say,
So
"Listen,
why cut it?
I said I'm putting the brakes on everything until I weed out the waste, fraud, and abuse, and then Adesia will get their money." But right now, I'm worried
Yeah, but
about
in the meantime,
millions that are going
Adesia
down the
can't
drain.
survive, right? Companies need ongoing revenue to do it. And at the other end, there are people who are delivering this product into very dangerous places. And if they can't find the work to get the product there, they've got to go find something else to do. You destroy an entire ecosystem when you tear out things without thinking about it, and you can do damage beyond what you intend. You can knock down a house in a day that took years to build.
Well, listen, the courts are on your side. Judge Jack McConnell ruled against Donald Trump. He was upheld in the first district. You know, you endorsed Jack McConnell. You endorsed Judge McConnell. He's really getting the conservative media treatment. He's getting a close-up now for all the money he threw around before he was appointed, and some of the causes and boards he belongs to, and some of the places the money. Do you have any concerns about Jack McConnell?
I think he's terrific. He's on the board. He was on the board of Crossroads.
Crossroads, right.
Crossroads takes care of homeless people. It's a very distinguished board. There's nothing wrong with being on the board of Crossroads. Jack has been on that bench now for many, many years since Senator Reid and I nominated him onto the court. And he has conducted himself in a way that has never been criticized. In our battle for his nomination, we had the strong support of the Rhode Island Chambers of Commerce and the Rhode Island community. So the storm that is being kicked up around him is really just part of MAGA counterpressure. I mean, when you do things like dox his daughter and put her name and face out there, that is, to me, really low. I mean, fine, you want to go after a judge, there's reasons why that's a bad idea. But when you're going after family members, I mean, even the Rhode Island mob didn't do that.
Okay, Senator, the point well taken. Let's focus on Crossroads, because he wants the funding unfrozen to agencies like Crossroads that receives money from the government. So do you see a conflict? He's on the board, unfreeze the money from the agencies he's over. Well, he wants to have a hand in freeing up. Do you see the conflict there?
No, because the complaint that was drafted by the attorneys general was not at all specific to Crossroads. Crossroads wouldn't even show up as a, decimal in all of this. This is a really simple, really clear separation of powers violation. And it's made worse by the fact that rather than comply with a court order, the Supreme Court, I'm sure, will uphold this. It's pretty basic stuff. But rather than comply with a proper court order, the Trump administration has retreated behind a fog bank of just secret contumacy. They won't say that they won't release the money. They won't release the money. There's some little eager MAGA beaver in there holding up the money despite the court order. And so you've got to get to the bottom of that. And I think Jack's well positioned to get to the bottom of it. It was unconstitutional in the first instance, and they're defying a proper court order in the second instance. And if that's not a time for a judge to act, I don't know what is.
All right, maybe let's just clarify it, and then we'll move on to other things. He was on the board of Crossroads. He's given a lot of money himself to Crossroads. The Crossroads gets
good,
money.
Right?
Crossroads gets money from the federal government. It depends on who you talk to. Crossroads is a little controversial with that Nilo Hotel, if you recall that about 2 years ago. Crossroads gets money from the agencies that were frozen. So is there a conflict in McConnell unfreezing the money that would go to Crossroads, the agency he served with? Do you see that conflict at all? You just don't?
No, I don't, to tell you the truth. The issues in front of him were so broad, and Crossroads is so minor, and it's not like it goes into his pocket. This isn't the McConnell fund.
No,
this is
said it was.
Crossroads, and he serves Crossroads. He dedicates his time to Crossroads. He's not somebody who's on the take from Crossroads, the way you see, for instance, Trump helping the fossil fuel industry, which gave him $100 million, and God knows what they gave him that wasn't reported.
Senator, is this a good way to deal with Donald Trump? Don't you need him for the bridge money and other things going forward?
We will continue that. I voted for his transportation secretary. Unfortunately, we're having to litigate for the already obligated bridge money because they're on that also in violation of a court order. But I think what you're seeing is such dramatic upheaval of the Constitution and of law-abiding government that it really is important to speak out, and particularly with those little Musk characters who are running around with no real authority, no real knowledge, getting into really dangerous systems like the FAA systems that deal with air traffic control. When the European air traffic control folks are saying, wow, we've got our hair on fire about what's going on with the FAA and about having to send planes into that airspace. You know, this is not normal. This is not a time to just sit back and say, well, you know, wouldn't this be nice if we could work this out? Yeah, where we can work stuff out, I'm all for it. I've got a record of that. But the path of destruction that this administration is wreaking right now is, to me, unconscionable.
With regard to the bridge funding, Peter Alvidi at the DOT said that he believes that project is outside of the funding freeze because it had only to do with Green New Deal transportation projects. The bridge has nothing to do with it. Have you heard that explanation from DOT, and do you believe it?
I've heard that explanation. I think it's accurate. What it has not done is provoke federal DOT, the Trump administration, to give it a thumbs up and say, yes, you're right. A bridge is not the Green New Deal. It should be obvious, but we have not been able to get that clarification. So they're going ahead right now in the hopes that that money will be there and the expectation that that money will be there, but without any statement from the federal government that that money will be there. And this, despite my chairman on the Environment Public Works Committee, who's a friend also, Senator Capito, making her own inquiries on my behalf into the Department of Transportation, whose highway fund we at EPW oversee and authorize, and still can't get a straight answer. That's part of why we have to keep going back into court, just to try to get straight answers to obvious questions.
Okay, Senator, let's move to world affairs. You called Defense Secretary Hegseth a hair gel talking head. You know, as a news anchor, I'm a little offended at that. As a buyer of hair gel and hairspray, I'm a little offended at that.
I know, and as you can see from looking at me, I need hair gel.
Yeah, you don't think he's a good Secretary of Defense. You don't think he's a good.
Nor does Jack Reed, who has real credibility and accountability and responsibility in this area.
Right.
This is the first defense secretary Jack has ever opposed, and he opposed him in no uncertain terms.
Listen, he's in, and so, by the way, all of Trump's nominees are getting in. It appears that Kash Patel might get in tomorrow. You and I are taping on a Wednesday. Tulsi Gabbard, she was shaky, got in. RFK Jr., who I understand is your acquaintance. I don't know if you're friends or pals.
We were friends for a long time.
Okay. And you gave him a stern lecture during the confirmation hearings. You didn't ask any questions. You kind of instructed him what to do. Could you just plumb that a little bit for us here?
Sure.
You voted against him in the end, but you gave an instruction. You better back off this anti-vax stuff. Could you just flesh that out for us?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think his anti-vax stuff is very irresponsible, so I told him so. And then I quickly moved to what was most important to me, which is the ways in which CMS, which he's about to oversee as Health and Human Services Secretary, has been hurting Rhode Island. The worst of it, of course, is paying us less than a nearby hospital in Connecticut or Massachusetts. There's no excuse why Rhode Island Hospital should be paid less by the federal government for the exact same procedure as St. Anne's in Fall River or Bacchus just across the border in Connecticut. And CMS has been impossible about trying to fix that. We have a way to try to fix that, and I wanted to make sure he was aware of that. We've also been trying to get some of the bureaucratic clutter out of the way when somebody is nearing the end of their life and say the family wants to get them in a nursing home. Why should you have to do 2 nights and 3 days in a hospital? All they need to do is go to a nursing home. So there are things like that. And then they took a run at Integra, one of Rhode Island's biggest primary care physician practices, which had done a wonderful, wonderful job in the program it was in. They tried to throw it out of the program, and their case for throwing it out of the program was so bad that they got slaughtered in court. when Integra sued. And I want to make sure that lawsuit isn't pursued. So that was very Rhode Island specific stuff, protecting one of our biggest physician practices, trying to make sure we can have people who are dying have better treatment for them and their families at the end, and getting rid of this hole that Rhode Island has been in for decades, with CMS paying us less than Connecticut and Massachusetts for the exact same services, often delivered in a better hospital.
That's not on Kennedy's watch. That was on Biden and Obama's
watch.
No,
but I'm after him to get it fixed.
You just wanted to correct. You wanted to make corrections.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I was after the Biden people too. I even put a couple of their people on hold in the Senate because I wasn't getting their attention enough.
Okay, let's move to the war in Ukraine. There are peace talks underway right now, or ceasefire in Saudi Arabia, as you and I speak. Ukraine hasn't been invited to the table. Zelensky says he won't go because he doesn't have a seat at the table. Do you agree with the general outline that we're going to have peace, that the land Russia grabbed, he's going to keep it, the money has been cut off, and he wants new elections? Is that an untenable position for you?
Yes. First of all, I think it sends a really bad example to the world, and specifically to China, that when you send your military in to grab another sovereign nation's land, when the settlement comes, you get to keep it. China is looking very covetously at Taiwan. And the signal that comes out of Ukraine has to address that. As the House Republican chairman of Armed Services said in Ukraine, the message that comes out of this has to be that Putin lost, and that everybody knows he lost because of the message that sends. Elections in Ukraine right now are a logistical nightmare because you've got so many people at the front, in trenches, fighting an actual hot war. How are you going to solve an election with enormous part of your population active in the military in a hot domestic war, another large bunch that have gotten out of the country to evade Putin's missiles coming in on, children's hospitals and residential neighborhoods, and at the same time, run a legit election, which, by the way, Putin is an expert in meddling in, as we found out in our own elections, where the bipartisan Intelligence Committee report and the Mueller report showed how Putin had meddled in our election. So you're setting up for a very dangerous situation if you have an election until there's peace and a ceasefire and troops can go home.
Okay, a non-starter for you. Letting Putin keep the territory he's grabbed, non-starter for you. Cutting off the weapons supply to Ukraine, that's a non-starter for you. So where does that leave us?
Well, I mean, if the Europeans will backfill, then they can. What we need is just to make sure that Ukraine can defend itself. We have every good reason that a nation that is set upon by another nation should have the resources to defend itself.
Okay, so keep giving them arms, keep supporting them. To what end? Until Putin gives up, then?
Yeah, until there's a return to the original boundaries.
All right, let's
go. And by the way,
I
would add we should go after the sovereign assets that Russia has squirreled away in the U.S. and in Europe to the tune of about $300 billion. Actually got a law passed to allow for that. And it's now, I think, a very significant part of the equation to put Putin's Russian sovereign assets that are frozen now actually under threat of being actually seized for their essentially war criminal behavior. I mean, you got to remember, the guy's actually been indicted as a war criminal for his behavior. To assume that this is all normal stuff and we'll just sort it out, keep what you took, that's really dangerous. And it'll be dangerous for decades if that model is allowed to succeed.
Okay, well, he grabbed Crimea and kept that under Obama.
Well, I think Obama should have been a good deal tougher about that.
It's not unprecedented.
But that doesn't make it. Well, that's this conflict. You can't say that it's a precedent if it's this conflict.
All right, Senator, let's move on.
The other precedent is Hitler taking over parts of Poland. That did not end well.
No. Do you really believe that Putin would go after Poland? Doesn't seem like he can grab Ukraine successfully. You think he'd go after Poland?
Yeah, I think Poland may be a little bit big, but I know that the Baltic states, Finland, Other non-NATO countries like Moldova are very, very worried that they're next in the in line for him to invade and dare the West to do anything about it. Okay. Again, a strong, firm line on Ukraine makes that less likely to happen. You don't embolden a criminal dictator like Putin if you can help it, and you would embolden him by letting him come away from Ukraine with a victory.
Senator, let's move to kind of a lightning round. We'll wrap up a couple of topics. I know I don't want to keep you.
I thought we've been doing lightning already. This has been good.
Well, I know. We enjoy this, the give and take. This is real Rhode Island over here. Do you think that Zelensky should give us access to his rare earth minerals in exchange for payment for the money we've given him? Does he owe that at least to us?
On fair terms, absolutely.
Okay. Oh, so common ground with Donald Trump.
On fair terms.
With regard to Gaza, a ceasefire appears to be holding. Some hostages are due to be released on Saturday. Has Donald Trump done a good job there?
He has done a very good thing, which is at the end, as the peace framework that the Biden administration negotiated was landing, having Mr. Walz go in and say, boom, yes, we're for this, do this, and punching the deal closed. And so now we have this framework for peace in the region, and he deserves credit for not taking that apart at the end, but in fact, hammering it home at the end. I do think his commentary about how somebody is going to clear out Gaza and somebody's going to take all the Palestinians someplace is not very serious, but has caused a lot of consternation. From what I've heard, he hasn't even asked the U.S. military or the State Department or anybody to develop a plan to implement that. That's mostly, it seems, talk, but it hasn't been helpful talk, and it has degraded the willingness of the Arab countries to participate in that ongoing peace process that he had such an important hand in at the end of the Biden administration.
Right. So I'll take the initial question I'll take it as a yes, but with an asterisk, qualifying that you believe Joe Biden actually did the heavy lifting on that and Trump came in at the end, but lived up to it.
But he closed the deal. That's good.
It's on his watch. He closed the deal. And he wants to, this notion of grabbing Gaza, taking it, rebuilding it for the good of all of the Middle East. You're laughing that off as comical.
Let's just say there was exactly 0 people on our recent delegation trip there who supported it or could name a single Republican in the Senate who would support it. I think there is, if you had to bring that to a Senate vote, you'd get exactly 0 votes on a referendum of some kind to either put American boots on the ground or American money into some kind of Gaza ownership takeover.
How about grabbing Greenland? It's our hemisphere. The Chinese and the Russians are floating around. How about that?
These things should get worked out in diplomatic channels, right? And just the idea that you threaten that you might use military muscle or in some way force Denmark to give up Greenland or force the Greenlanders to give up themselves. It's not a great way of speaking. What it does is it matches the arguments that Putin made about why he should go into Ukraine. It's an echo from the United States government of the logic of the Ukraine invasion. I think in that case, it wasn't just a little bit odd, but it's a little bit dangerous when the president of the United States is echoing the logic of a dictator at work and at war in a sovereign, independent, democratic nation.
Same for Panama. He wants the canal, wants control of the canal because he says the Panamanians have abused it, got a little too cozy with the Chinese. Bad deal to give it away to begin with.
We built the canal. There's probably a sensible role to be worked out if we're dissatisfied with the access for our shipping through the canal. So I would leave that also to be worked out in diplomatic channels.
Victor David Hansen. Davis Hansen. You've seen him making the media rounds. He's a conservative, but he's sometimes very reasonable, at least in his explanations. He says, Trump does all this on purpose, almost trolling, throws these outrageous things out there, but it gets people talking and moving, and Trump knows what he's doing with regard to Greenland and Panama and Gaza. It gets people like you in the Senate and others sometimes worked up, but it puts the notions out there, puts it on the agenda, and sometimes it gets action. Do you believe that explanation? That's a little more sophisticated than just shooting from the hip.
Yeah,
Victor Davis Hansen said that.
My Republican colleagues, the ones who I'm close with and talk about this with a good deal, all agree that that is a Trump strategy. Mm-hmm. They also agree that when the notions that he's floating are nutty or dangerous, it's actually very helpful to get a lot of pushback, and it's hard for them to do it because of his sway over the Republican Party. So on repeated occasions, I've actually been encouraged to raise a little hell about stuff to give them a little bit of cover so they can go back to the administration and say, that was not actually such a good idea. Let's not do that.
Okay. Hey, Senator, always good to have you on.
It's always wonderful to be on with you, Gene. I love our lively conversations.